Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to another episode of the Legal Beagles. And this is AJ. He is back. He is back from Arizona. Well, he's in Arizona, but he's back. And this is a direct refutation of our last week's video that apparently upset some people about mortgage defaults and how our guest, Zach, went about it. And I would just like to point out, before we get started, that the Canadians have all banded together and stopped paying their mortgages, and many other people around the globe are understanding what is happening to us. And anything or anyone that wants to talk about some way to fight back that is nonviolent, I'll give them a platform to talk about it. You can make your own decisions on it, but I understand that the banks are a lot of the reason we're in the mess we're in, both financially and, I would say, been enslaved here in America for, 40, 50, 60 years plus. And so with that, I'm going to introduce AJ and let him give us his talking points, and we'll start the conversation. AJ, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah. So I have some thoughts on some of the things that you've said, and hopefully they are of use to our viewers over here. So yeah, we're 100 years deep at least into this system that operates the way that it does, and it certainly has acted to anyone who's done any study of it, I think will reach similar conclusions that it does kind of enslave us if we allow it to. But to quote the Ye, previously known as Kanye West, slavery is a choice.
True.
Whether or not we're enslaved by the circumstances that we find ourselves in is something that that really depends upon the individual. It depends on how you view your situation, and then what you choose to do about that situation that you find yourself in. Because as we've been commanded, be in the world, but not of the world. That's kind of the main thing. And then I have some perspective on a lot of the different aspects of it that feed into that. But whether or not we are, instead of viewing it as debt slavery, the way that I kind of perceive it is more like it's a farming system. And there's a product or a crop that's being harvested, and that harvesting is like, it's the interest on the money that's paid to the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor reserves anything. Central banking certainly, and the usury associated with it is it's a problem. It's not biblically sound. It's not sound according to most religions. It is. It takes that which is fruitful and makes it sterile by creating a tax, as it were, on the labor of everybody. But whether or not that is slavery or just a way to effectively harvest the energies of a whole bunch of people that choose to participate in that system is kind of that's the crux of the matter from my perspective.
Right. And so I have two quotes for you, and I'm going to paraphrase the first one. I think it's by Thomas Jefferson, but he said, "A national bank is more threatening to the United States than a standing army." Yep. And the second one from Hosea is, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge."
Oh, yes.
And so lack of knowledge about what the banks are doing to us and what they have done to us is the problem. Because, in fact, I'll give you one more paraphrase quote from Henry Ford. He said, "If the people understood how the banking industry works, there'd be revolution in the streets tomorrow."
Right.
Tomorrow. And this was 50 years ago. And so they have done awful, unlawful, fraudulent things that they have made lawful, through lobbyists and the buying and or renting because it's cheaper of politicians. And I don't agree with how Zach was going about this. I don't think I would put my family in that kind of jeopardy, but he is at least taking action rather than sitting here and talking about it.
Well, and that is true to a point, But the one of the main issues with the action that he's taking is that it's unproductive action. He talked about how defaulting on debt is it eliminates the currency or the money, quote unquote, because it's not, like debt notes is what the Federal Reserve notes are. He talked about how they're created when you take on a loan, and your promise to pay is what actually creates those Federal Reserve notes that are then in circulation, which creates, the inflationary effect that occurs. But then he pointed out that by defaulting on the debt, that removes them from circulation. The flaw in the logic of what he proposed is that the only reserve notes that he's eliminating, the only reserve notes that he's removing from circulation are the ones that he himself created. And so it's
Right.
it's like daylight savings time. You cut the end off a blanket and put it on the other end, and then you think you got more daytime. You don't have any more daytime. It still is a zero sum. And so my perspective on that, and here's a little bit of my background, just so that I can share with everybody where I come from and where my perspective is founded.
Right.
So I worked in the mortgage industry. I worked in the mortgage industry for a little over 20 years. And during that time, I had a variety of roles. I managed the closing department, and I was a loan officer and did different things. And during the long ago times of the deadly coronavirus, I came to see that a lot of the manipulation that people were subjected to, a lot of the need to go along with something, whether they agreed with it or not, was founded on leverage that came in the form of debt. If you have debt, then you have to do what you're compelled to do because you got this debt. You got to take care of the debt. And when I realized that, and this was actually help in large part from probably my favorite comedian / live streamer, Owen Benjamin. I follow his stuff, but it was articulated very well that it puts us in this position where we don't get to decide for ourselves what to do. We're, kind of slaves because we've already borrowed against our future. And if you're borrowing against your future, you don't have full decision-making in your path. So I saw, okay, I have this big house and I got this fancy job and I got all these nice things, quote unquote, but all I am is a higher version of slave than what I would like to be. And so because I recognize that
you're a trustee.
Well, if even that, who knows? Yeah. Who knows
Right.
if I actually was a trustee of the benefits that I was receiving at that time. I was just a well-dressed servant to my possessions is kind of a way that I would articulate it. And so I recognized that what was going to come down the line, at the time it was close down your business and wear a mask. And oddly enough, putting people in debt that they'll never get out of was determined to be, this is essential business. So that never shut down, but a lot of other things did. And then they said, well, you can come back, wear a mask. And that was the next level of control. And it became clear that after that was going to be stuff that had to do with bodily autonomy, where if you want to participate in this game, you're going to have to do these things. And I knew that those were never things that I was going to choose to participate in, but I knew that I couldn't, I had to make changes to my life because it was unlikely that I was going to be able to change everything else. It's easier to wear shoes than to pave the world. So I made the determination that, okay, what's that going to look like for me? So I sold my big house to pay off the debt associated with that. I took the proceeds from that and paid off all the other everythings that I had. I eliminated car payments and got stuff with, cash, so that everything that I had was, I owned it. I owned the things that I had. And then I took some of my proceeds and I used that to buy a business that I use. And the business is just me. It's just me doing my thing. But now every day, my labors, my energy, the essence of my industry is what I exchange for the currency of the time. We're not going to eliminate Federal Reserve notes. I don't think that that's a possibility, because the reality is we're sitting on that branch, So if we cut the branch off, we're up there. What's going to happen? And not only to us, but what's going to happen to all the people that maybe aren't as aware or aren't as alert to the things that that go on if that branch is eliminated. We enjoy
Well,
a very
let me just interrupt there for a second. We could get rid of Federal Reserve notes. If the actual Treasury did what the Treasury was supposed to do, but the Treasury has farmed out
right.
the printing of money to this private bank, the Federal Reserve, that they now borrow printed money from the Federal Reserve. So as soon as you borrow a dollar, it's not even worth the dollar because it's now owed with interest back to the Federal Reserve. And so because we don't print our own money as a country, which we have every right to do, we have enabled this bank and this private corporation and we don't know who owns it. We have some guesses and some theories of whatever, but we don't know who owns it, and we don't know what their decisions are. And let's just say I'm one of the owners of the Federal Reserve and I need to buy a politician over here. Well, I'll just print some money.
Oh yeah.
Print some money, buy the politician, get the policy in that I need, and then move on. Now, you can't do that. I can't do that as a private individual over here, but this is how they've been operating. And it infected the entire system from the top to the bottom. And yeah, I understand Zach's frustration and why he would want to do something about it. And if seeing what's happening in Canada, 40 to 50% have stopped paying their mortgages, all their bills, and it's put a real crunch on Canada. And it's making them respond. But Americans, are attached to all of their things, stuck in this 3D world, this 3D dimensional physical world, and it's just hard to give up possessions and worry about the future if you want to really make change. But it's going to require sacrifice.
Well, it will require sacrifice, and I think the point that I was getting to is that the sacrifice has to be it has to be individual. It has to be I can't sacrifice you.
Right.
I can't sacrifice your standard of living or your life. I can sacrifice myself. I can sacrifice what I have, but it's not a sacrifice if you compel it onto someone else. It's something else. That's not exactly what it is. And so when I saw that mortgage potentially would be used to control me, that having this job in this capacity could be used to control me, it could be used to make me do things I didn't want to do or to do things in a certain way, I made the decision that I didn't want to access this stuff. I didn't want to leave that as a potential avenue. And I wanted to take charge of my own life by making this choice. And as we're, I think I said it earlier, be in the world, not of the world. There's demonstration within America of entire little societies that exist that are in America. They're there, but they're not of it. The Amish don't have the same level of susceptibility to Federal Reserve stuff because they don't play the same. They're playing a different game. Right. And as it relates to the Federal Reserve and the central banking and kind of how they do their thing, what they have is a very sophisticated, functional system that works really well in doing what it does. But in reality, it's a product, and it's a product that you choose to if you view it as that, you can use the product. And our rentable or leasable politicians, they certainly like accepting that. They're like, look at me, I'm rich. I got this much money, this many thousands or millions or whatever dollars, for whatever they're worth. But they accept those to compromise their morality, their ethics, to do things that are unconscionable otherwise. But they're selling themselves for what is in reality nothing, that by manipulation on computers can be taken away from them in a moment's notice.
Yeah.
And we see that happen all the time. Even the richest people in the world, you see these theoretically super wealthy people, and these are the ones that we're allowed to know about. I'm sure there are others behind the scenes that operate at a level where we don't even have any perception of it. But take, for example, your Elon Musks or your Bill Gates or your celebrities that have their millions, based on how they conducted themselves and have continued to conduct themselves over the last few years, it's very clear that they're not actually free. They can't do and say whatever they want. They have to follow a certain line. They have to do certain things in a certain way. And I think it's because if they don't, everything they have is not theirs any longer. And there's a big difference between having a lot of money and having wealth, like having richness of life, having all the things that basically that God has promised us and put us here to have. You know,
Right.
we're to be fruitful and multiply, but those are two distinct things. You know,
Yeah. Wealth includes health, freedom, and freedom of choice, and a lot of things like that. But let's dive
family.
into your expertise here about mortgages.
Okay. Yes.
Can you explain to the people, without getting in trouble, what how the mortgage works? You know, an average person comes in and signs a loan for $100,000. How much of the bank's money pays for that house?
$0.
$0.
The bank. So with fractional reserve lending, the bank has to have a certain amount of collateral against the maximum amount that they would utilize in lending out. And it's been steadily reducing, but it's at the point now where like the big banks, they don't have anything in the game. They have none. The majority of my time was at a good sized private mortgage bank, and then a really good sized private mortgage bank located out here, and one of them is nationwide. But at both of them, even at the biggest one, like the collateral that they have against the lending that they do, it doesn't have to be actual money on hand. It can be a property, it can, a variety of things. But theoretically, the bank has to have some of its own skin in the game, but they never actually put any up, because when it comes time to, like, if you borrow $100,000 and you have to come in with some amount of money, the bank puts it on a credit card. Essentially, it's called a warehouse line, but all it is a temporary short-term funding mechanism until the loan itself, which the value comes from the promise to repay from the individual, until that gets funded. It's just on a card earning a little bit of interest for however long.
So just like a credit card, when you sign that receipt, they've monetized your signature and created the amount of money that you signed for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So if I go in to borrow $100,000, they use my signature and they say, all right, here's your $100,000. And you may get it in cash or you may get it whatever, but the bank did not give any of their physical holdings to you for that house. No. And so this goes back to Zach's question here is, who's the injured party? Well,
and it's maybe a difficult thing to, I'm not sure precisely how to articulate this, because is the bank an injured party if you default? Possibly not, except for that the bank has expenses. The bank is facilitating your use of a product, right? The mortgage is a product. Your use of the funds to buy your house is a product. They are facilitating that. They are providing a service, right? So if you then default,
are they providing a service or gatekeeping?
It's a service, because the gate doesn't have to be there. If we didn't want to, if we chose not to operate in that realm, and instead of utilizing the easy access to money that we don't yet have, which is what credit is, it's using money because we don't have the patience or don't have the capacity to save up. And we've been sold on this idea that the American dream is all the things that it is. If you don't have the same things as someone else, a lot of people think, well, I deserve that. I need to have that. And it's facilitated by the government, which is rented by the banks and the industries. Like, they pay money to get people to believe that it's very important. You have to own your own this. It's your biggest investment. Like, your biggest investment is your family in reality. Your biggest investment is what you actually get from the life that you live. You could have all the money in the world, but if you don't have relationships, those are worth far more than all the money. But we don't as a society, we don't believe that. We believe that the money is the end goal. And it's one of the least valuable things that there can be, because how many times do we hear of super wealthy people who, like, they'll talk of how they're leaving nothing to their children, or they're miserable on their deathbed. Like it's so common that it's like a joke that it's even proposed otherwise, but we still go along with it because it's prevalent.
Well, it's prevalent, and it's peer pressure. It's indoctrination. It's the schooling, which is influenced by the banks, right?
Well, which is owned by, to send your kids to a school that is controlled by the government. It's not public education; it's government education.
And there's been no consequences for anyone in Congress spending money we don't have, borrowing it on the credit card. They're defaulting every day. All they do is increase debt.
So another way to think about that, though, is the money is debt. The money itself is debt notes, and the spending of the money and the maintenance of the debt is the only thing that makes America the economic powerhouse. Like Donald Trump once said, if you owe the bank $100 or $1,000, it's your problem. If you owe the bank $10 million, it's their problem, right? So right now we're in a situation where America, they claim that it's however many trillion, $33 trillion, whatever that is. But what that means is that everybody else in the entire world is kind of dependent on America economically succeeding, because otherwise all the money that, all the money, resources, et cetera, that they've put into supporting this behemoth, like, they're out everything. So the strength and the ability to live as we do is brought on by the fact that America is in debt. It's not my debt. It's not your debt, not in reality. And that's one of the big tricks that government does, and that the propaganda arms do all the time, is they make us identify with things that are not us. And doing that causes us to have an emotional reaction or an emotional connection to it. I'm sure that you've seen and had exposure to the information, like all of the income tax collected isn't enough to pay the interest on the debt. Have you heard something similar to that?
Sure.
Okay. So if it doesn't even pay the interest on the debt, and the debt continues to grow, then what is it that we're actually doing other than taxing, which is like just sapping our energy once a year to play along with a system that wasn't designed for us, doesn't actually apply to us. And really all it does is makes people kind of miserable once or twice a year to go along with this thing. Like, to me, it's there's a system that exists, and there's a system that a lot of people think, this is what I got to do. This is what I got to play with. But I see it more like, as I mentioned earlier, there's a product called dollars. And whether it's dollars, or if you're in a classroom and the teacher gives out gold stars, you want as many gold stars as you can get, because maybe you can get the most prizes off the top shelf with all the gold stars, right? But as soon as you're outside of that, they don't matter. Your mom at home doesn't care about the stars that you got in class. So inside of it, you have to do certain things in order to get the things that you need, right? So we have to have a certain number of dollars to live our day, but we can expend our energies, any one of us can, in order to get the things to meet our requirements of that day. But then we can also take all those things, all those energies, all those resources, and apply them differently in ways that are only productive to us. You don't have to spend all your energy within the system. And that's something that, like the Amish, for example, they do that really well. They for the most part, keep all their energy in their community. And then periodically they'll do things for others, and they'll bring in additional resources, but the resources are for their community. They're not for everybody else.
Yeah.
The propaganda and the things that have been perpetuated onto us that get us thinking that we have to have all this stuff and keep up with the Joneses, and you got to have 2 cars and all those different things. All those do is they constantly sap your resources and take away your ability to be productive for yourself and for your family.
Yeah. I mean, this comes back to spiritual principles, right? It's going to, you either, like you said, be of this world be in this world, but not of this world. And so if you are tied up with your computers and your house and all your cars, and you want to keep them, then, maybe you aren't growing as fast as you should be spiritually. Far be it from me to cast stones. I'm not doing that. But so the full faith and credit of the American government, though, bringing it back, is the people and their productivity, right?
Yeah.
And so it really is our debt on some level. I mean, what do you think we had to promise these countries to buy all this debt to enable us to spend it all? You know, or are we just printing it and hoping that no one calls us out? I mean, you know,
it's a Bernie Madoff type situation. Like that's literally what it is. The only thing that had to be promised was you give us resources and we'll give you more in return. You give us gold and we'll pay you back more, right? And so, like, looking back historically, we can see that the U.S. federal government, they defaulted on their debts every 70 years, something like that. Since inception, since the country first started, they're like, France, lend us some money. We don't have it to pay you back. Let's restructure, and then again, we got to restructure. And all the time, all it is a promise. You'll get more in the future if you let us keep going. I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. That's kind of how it's happened. So it's not that the other countries, I think, were promised the labor of American citizens, or the American people. It's not precisely that. It's just resting on the same type of greed that got all of the investors into Bernie Madoff in trouble, where they said, oh, you're going to give us a 8% or 18% return, whatever that amount is. You're going to give us that return. We like that deal. Here you go. Here's whatever it is that you asked for. And anytime that something is promised as too good to be true or going against sound principles, it always comes back to spiritual stuff. There's a reason why usury is one of it's a sin in a lot of different holy books. It's a sin in a lot of different religions. And in Dante's Inferno, the usurers were on like the lowest level. And the reason for that is because it takes what is productive and it's usurers and sodomites that are on the same level, right?
It falsely inflates everything.
Well, sodomy takes what is fertile and makes it sterile, and usury takes what is sterile and makes it fertile. If you leave gold on a table, it doesn't make more gold. And there's nothing good going into it to make it into more. All it does is it takes from one place and gives to another. And I think that's why usury is so forbidden in so many ways. And the fact that we practice it outwardly and pretend like we're doing the right thing, when there are, like, even within America, there are other communities that do not participate, and we pretend like we're doing the right thing, right? Like, did you know that big banks, Bank of America, Chase, these places, they have loans available that are, what do they call it? That are not haram to Muslims, because in Islam, usury is forbidden, right? So it's haram, it's sinful to take out a loan with interest. So these big banks, big national banks, have loans available where instead of them paying interest, they take out a loan that doesn't have any interest associated with it. Why don't they have the same thing for Christians? Christians used to believe that usury was wrong, but now everybody's like, well, I need another car. I need the big house.
Right. So what's the answer, AJ? What do we do? If let's say you have a $400,000 mortgage, and by the way, I think everyone knows by now, but just to repeat, mortgage in French is death pledge, right?
Oh yes,
the death pledge.
Yes, and for me,
I mean, other than giving up your house and moving into, I guess, something you might could afford, but let's just say you're living paycheck to paycheck with $400,000 home and 4 kids and 2 cars, and you and your wife, basically can maintain the interest payment to keep what you got.
Okay.
I mean, half the country give up all their cars or 1 car and their house and move into a 2-bedroom apartment. I mean, that's the answer. But do you think that's going to happen?
Well, the answer is, it might not be precisely that, but it's something along those lines. The solutions are always individual. But as I said earlier, it's better to wear shoes than to try to pave the world. We can't make everybody else do things the way that we think is best. And the reality, or at least how I perceive it, is if you think that it's wrong to have like money lent for things that where you don't have anything into it, if that's someone's belief, well, are you more moral if you have taken out a loan that you can't afford or that keeps you operating at a constant level of near insolvency? Like, where's the morality in that? And there are, like, biblically, there's very strict things laid out where there's jubilees periodically and such, and those don't exist anymore. But if they did, I suspect that the people who got themselves into deep debt would probably repeatedly get themselves into deep debt.
I agree.
And so this is another thing from my own personal history, right? When I was a very young man and I first started getting the ability to obtain credit, and I had credit cards and I could charge them up, I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. And I charged things on credit cards. And then when I was in my probably early 20s, late teens or something, I had many, many, many thousands of dollars of debt, and I didn't know, how to repay it. And the reality is I could have repaid it, but I just kind of didn't want to. So I made one last hurrah and I got the things that I wanted, and then I filed for bankruptcy. And it was like, it wasn't the most ethical thing to do, but I got, I suddenly all of the stuff went away, and then years later it was like a clean slate and I got to start again. But then I got right back into debt later on, many years later, in a similar manner. So it had to start with me. My ability to operate without usury had to begin with me making the decision that that was not a thing that I wanted to participate in, which also meant that I could not put that onto others. And that was for me. Like, if someone else views it differently, that's their choice. I'm not, I won't dictate someone else's morality or conduct, but I will try to demonstrate a different way and try to show others that things are possible.
Right.
So when I was in debt and I had the $400,000 mortgage and all those things, instead of trying to say, well, this is bad and whatever, I needed to be rid of it altogether. It didn't matter if I stopped paying, which, like, honestly, I did. I stopped paying for a time during COVID while I prepped my house for sale. And so I no longer was putting money into the interest on a property that, I probably hadn't earned yet based on my conduct beforehand. So that helped me to see what it would be like when I no longer was operating in from a constantly behind position of always paying debt, right? Then when the house sold, I was able to pay everything off, eliminate all that stuff, and change the standard that I was operating under. So no longer did I have to have the fancy cars with the big payments. Now I had the very modest cars without any payment.
Right.
And no longer did I have I paid more in rent than I used to pay for the mortgage now, but it's just rent. And I don't have it's my house for all intents and purposes, but I'm not stuck here for 30 years. Right. And when I choose to leave, I don't care. I'm making it nice because this is where I am. And so I feel that I need to be fruitful in this environment. So I do, yard improvements and things to make it as nice as I can. And I'll leave it better for the next person who comes along. But I don't have to worry about, am I going to make money on the sale? Is it going to be this or is it going to be that?
Right. So do you think that, what's your opinion on, Zach says that him and the bank don't have an actual contract that doesn't meet all the elements of the contract.
I think that that's a losing argument for him. He's not going to find success in the system with that argument.
Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think so either, because you're not going to find a judge, but you can't even find a judge to rule in the black letter of the law, much less, much less anything that goes against this behemoth of a system. But
further, whether he could find a judge or not, he doesn't have that as recourse.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Are the elements of the contract there with the bank and a mortgage? That's what I'm asking.
The elements that are in the contract, the bank fulfilled their obligations. The bank did all the things that they need to. So whether he believes that they did it in an appropriate manner or not is kind of immaterial. He wanted to get the money to buy a house, as one example, right? And he put whatever amount down that he did to do that. So he brought in his consideration. Well, the bank gave the rest of the money. They gave that money to the other side. Now, his position appears to be that the bank created that money from nothing, but that's immaterial to the contract itself. He didn't have a contract for how was the bank going to come up with the money? What methodology were they going to use? And the fact that they went to essentially a big credit card that they have is none of his business. If you and I have a contract where you want to borrow $10,000 from me and I charge it on my credit card that I get miles on, and I give you $10,000, you got $10,000. It doesn't matter that the only thing behind it was a signature on paper, and that I'm going to use your repayment to pay the interest that my credit card charges me. That's not, like, you're not privy to that. So his whole thing is that, well, they didn't create the money in the right way. Well, how do you have a say in that? And if you think that they didn't do that, then why did you participate in it? That's the part that I find maybe most concerning about what he presented, is that as he presented it, he saw a moral flaw in the system, but then rather than taking himself out of the system, he engaged in action that itself is questionable. And so from a litigating perspective, I would say he doesn't even have clean hands, number one. But number two, in his contract, in his deed of trust, in the stuff that he signed with the bank, he already gave up power of attorney for them to do certain things that he's not going to have the ability to defend against, because of, like, he already gave away that stuff.
Yeah.
I agree that the system is a problem. It's more that in order to solve the problem that exists, we have to raise up as people. We have to be better, because we can't make everything else better. That's the utopian, do for others what they are unwilling or unable to do for themselves kind of attitude. And that never can work. If you gave someone all the money in the world, but they didn't have the morality to do good things with it, it would all go away. We see that with lottery. Like, the lottery is literally, to me, I think it's just a way to get more money into the system by creating this huge thing that's paid out. Like, in case anyone didn't know this, the way that lotteries are paid, there's not a bunch of money sitting there. There's insurance behind it. So they pay a premium so that if someone gets the winnings, then the insurance company is the one who pays out the stuff. So it's like a gamble on top of a gamble on top of a gamble. And the money, just like everything else, kind of comes into creation when the winner exists.
Yeah. So the answer here is to stop participating in these things. Yes.
As with any sin, like, I'm going to get a little bit crass here. And this is one that always kind of rang to me. If you have a problem with, if you got a problem with the gay bar, you can't go into the gay bar and tell them, hey guys, you need to stop doing what you're doing. They're there because they want to be there. If you don't like it, stay out of it.
Right.
If you don't want it to be around you, you can do things so that it's not right in your vicinity, but you can't go to someone else who is by choice engaging in an activity and tell them that they're wrong for engaging in it. And you especially can't do that if you yourself are engaging in it.
Mm-hmm. You're right. You're absolutely right.
That's the part that's challenging.
The part I have problem with, it's more than just a moral dilemma that the banks are capitalizing on. It's we've been told and indoctrinated and all of our lives that this is how the system works, and it's stable, everything's going to be fine. And it was a lie.
Oh yes, but we've been lied to about things.
Now, did that specific bank tell you that lie? I don't know, but you were lied to. You were lied to convince you to go sign that mortgage at some point. Now, should you have gained more knowledge and avoided that? Most likely, yes. And yes, Jesus will tell you yes. But, before the last 15, 20 years, there's no one that thought about these things. Like very, very small percentage of the people even knew how the Federal Reserve worked. And
Well,
so there was a fundamental lie told by the people in authority that made you perceive that that was okay to do. Am I wrong here?
um, there are people that knew. There always have been,
Sure.
but you won't hear what you don't want to hear. And I think
Right.
that that's more of what the issue is. Everybody likes it when they're on the receiving end of the thing that they want to receive, and nobody's going to look at it too closely if they're getting what they want. And to remove the responsibility, like we all had that uncle, right? I mean, maybe not everybody that exists, but I think a lot of us in this group, we all had that somebody who kind of knew things, who kind of told us about stuff. And this is many decades ago. They knew what was up. They had the perception that things were not as they should have been. And I think that that's always been a thing, because just like there's a Bible in the courtrooms, these foundational principles are just that. They are foundational. And you can go against them, but if you're going against them because you want to believe the thing that's told to you by liars, you're choosing to believe what's told to you by liars. And if you don't accept the responsibility that goes along with having being accountable for your own actions, right? If you're accountable for your own actions, if I'm accountable for my own actions, then that means that every choice I make, I get not only the benefit of the good choices, but I'm responsible for the consequence of the negative choices. If you're not willing to take on that level of accountability, that level of responsibility, well, then there's going to be a government that steps in to govern,
That's
control,
right.
and
Well, there
they're
will
gonna keep
always be people that need to be controlled in this world. There's no way 100% of the people are going to take accountability and responsibility for their actions, and
yeah.
it's just never going to happen. But when a small percentage do, it makes the society better, right? And
Yeah,
and I look, this whole interview, I'm playing devil's advocate, of course, but
for sure.
when you graduated high school, did you have the choice to believe the lies you were told? What you weren't told both sides of the story and say which do you believe? You were given
Right.
one side of the story,
Oh,
and
exactly.
and there where do you find alternative at 12 15 20 years ago I mean
Yeah, or 30, whatever. So
or 30 whatever, yeah.
this is where the challenge comes in, because if you allow your enemies to educate your children, you're a fool, right? That Malcolm X said that back in the 60s.
But do you know they're your enemies at this point?
He knew in the 60s. So why is it that, like, every cycle there are people who know. There are people who do know. The problem is, are you going to trust what someone else tells you, or are you going to trust your own judgment? Are you going to believe what an authority says, or are you going to believe your own experience, right? We're not taught in the public, quote unquote, which is also just government indoctrination center schooling system. We're not taught how to learn. We're taught things to recite back to get a
Right.
good grade. And we're taught that getting a good grade is the thing that we need to do. And we're taught that if we get a good grade, then we'll get a good job, and then we'll get the money. And all of these things are a perception altering thing that make it so that by the time we graduate, then we have this idea that we have to do this thing, that there's an authority that's going to have the right answer, that money is the goal. All of these things are false concepts. Now, it is, like, you're correct. And I agree that if you've only ever had one side of things, one perception of things, then you're maybe less accountable for your decisions, right? Because you didn't know any other way. And so, to get to the question earlier about, is there somebody at the bank, for example, that knows what they're doing? Most of the time, no. I don't think anyone that I previously worked with had any idea of what was actually happening at the banks, had any idea that there was anything even potentially immoral about what was done. I certainly didn't for the time that I was there. I viewed my role as I'm helping people to get the things that they want,
No.
because, like, that's what it was. I believed in it, and
Yeah.
that helped me to do it in a manner that, like, people liked that I was able to help them get the homes. Now, I'm not gonna
the criminal that thinks he's doing good, that
Mhm.
gives him the sustainability and can do the most damage, that thinks he is doing something good for someone else.
Yeah.
At what point does mass deception through controlled media and
Mhm.
all outlets, at what point does that become criminal or fraudulent, which is criminal, right? At what
Right.
point?
That's a difficult piece because if the truth is presented, it's just not as as well packaged, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then it's a different thing. And so the issue is that America, as it exists right now, has had certain interests in control of the things that we would now maybe describe as American culture. They're all working, working together for a long time, maybe 100 years. And so if you think like, oh well, they told us this, okay, but how did they tell you this? They told you this through something that 150 years ago it didn't exist, and you wouldn't believe it if it did.
Right.
Right. There are some things that are presented like
You're talking about the TV, right?
I'm talking about TV,
Radio.
news, radio, movies, print media,
Entertainment.
music, like all the different things together, all the things that we're told, like these are the important things. It's coming from a single perspective, right? But if you talk to the farmer who is raising animals to feed his family, like he doesn't care about the Wall Street, whatever bit of nonsense that they're saying, like the only thing he cares about is how his crop is going to do, what his animals are doing, how healthy they are. Like the scale where we're told that, well, you have to have this giant thing in order to be successful. You have to have it has to be this high level. That's the most important thing. All that's doing is perpetuating a belief system. It's presenting a belief system that if our families and if our communities were stronger, we wouldn't have ever bought into it.
That's right. Well, that's right. But that whoever, the Rockefellers, for instance, that started our education system, they undermine, he specifically created programs to undermine these things, undermine the family and all the, now we went along with it. So it's our, well, I wasn't there. I wasn't there when that happened, when that started, but it was passed down as knowledge from my parents. Right. So, so they did buy into it to,
if our parents
present me a lie.
If our parents accepted what they were told by their parents and their parents accepted what they were told by somebody else, there's a limiting of the responsibility aspect to it. But there was something along the way where someone accepted the offer of something that was a little too good to be true, and they accepted it and went with it.
Yeah, that's right. And so this brings me back to the point about the contract is, if I believe, and the media tells me, and every book every common book that you read or school book or whatever, that I walk into a bank and I borrow $100,000, I put up 20 of my own, the bank gives me $80,000. Now I believe that they took $80,000 out of their account and put it into my house. Just like they said in what's that famous Christmas movie with Bedford Falls or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, your money's in his house and your money's in his house. Perpetuating
There's
a lie.
That every year.
Now, if I believe that when I signed the contract, is there anywhere in the mortgage contract that says, no, we're not taking any of our physical money and giving it to you? Or is that in the language and the legalese, or where are we at with that?
Why would it be?
Well, because if it requires meeting of the minds, a contract requires a meeting of the minds of how this thing goes down. And if you're deceiving me on how the transaction is going to occur, doesn't that breach a contract?
What's the contract though? That, because getting back to what was said earlier, if it's expanding beyond the certain the
Well, so
the
if I believe that the bank is going to give me $80,000 of their reserves, of their
but why?
reserve money,
But again, that's the thing.
if I may not sign the, a lot of people probably wouldn't sign that mortgage agreement if they knew how the bank created that money,
well, let me ask you this. Okay, so we're
right?
gonna
And
shift.
is that not part of the contract to getting money?
I would say no.
Okay.
And I would like to kind of analyze the logic of the situation. We're going to shift it a little bit into something that is maybe easier and less emotional to
Yeah.
think about. Okay, so if you want to buy something for $100 and you have 20 and you want to borrow 80 from me, and I say no problem, we're going to sign this agreement and I'm going to give you $80, that you believe that $80 comes out of my wallet, or if that $80 comes from a loan that I take out from my other friend.
But if you stole that $80 to give it to me,
Well, that's a whole different thing, but it's not stolen. That's the thing.
okay.
The powers that have created the system that currently exists have made it like they call it not stealing. And even if it was stealing,
right.
who is it stolen from?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's where the challenge and the difficulty comes in. Recognizing that the system itself is flawed and that it's unsustainable. It is unsustainable. It is flawed. There are huge issues with it that it is built upon a biblically unsound foundation. But
so they did steal it though, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
When you create money,
Mm-hmm.
you deflate the value of everyone else's money. So if you have a pool of $100 and you're going to loan me that 80, but instead you just said, oh, I'm going to shuffle some more poker chips in here and you're going to think it's money. Doesn't that devalue everyone else's money?
If you only look at that part of the equation,
okay,
then it does. But here's the other thing that it does, right? What it also does is it adjusts the value of the debt that everybody owes. So if you devalue the money by adding inflationary stuff, you put more money into circulation, so the currency itself is worth less. Well, the debts are too. And so if you borrowed $100,000 when there's $200,000 of money.
Yeah, but if my neighbor only has $100,000 in the bank and no debt, what have you done to him?
Well, but which maybe he has something to bring to it or whatever, but the reality is our money is debt.
Well, yes. If we're going to look at it that way, that's true. So, but I devalued this guy's money in his savings account if he doesn't have any debt.
That's why people that have money don't have savings accounts.
Well,
the asset havers have assets.
That's not an issue here, though. That's not an issue.
The issue is that our quality of life in America since probably the 50s has been based upon a constantly increasing supply of quote unquote money, which is the Federal Reserve notes.
Yeah,
and as they grow bigger, nobody actually cares. Like we pretend like we care about the debt, but people don't get out of debt.
No, they can't.
And the reason why they don't get out of debt is because as the money supply increases, they're using less and less of their stuff to pay off the debts that they had from the past, or they can restructure the debts and keep doing it. It is a Ponzi scheme. It's a thing that is unsustainable. But if you're receiving the benefit of it, you don't have the moral ground to say it shouldn't be there because you're receiving the benefit. Like and a big eye-opening thing that Donald Trump did when he was president was he talked about how he's the king of debt, how awesome it is to just have more and more debt. He put it right out there, right through the controlled media systems that put it into everybody's face. Nobody has an excuse now to say we weren't told, but the reality is that we don't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to have anything to do with this system that is a problem, you have to do that. I have to do that. We have to individually make the choice that we're going to operate in a different manner. or we are part of the very thing that we don't want. And the reality is, most people, I live in a neighborhood, there's tons of people around here. If they suddenly had to like live on only what they're able to create through their industry, their own personal industry, rather than benefit from the debts that exist and the system that is inflated as it is, most people would not survive. And
Wow.
it's not moral at all to do
Right.
that to these people that are not awake.
All right, last question. Last
Yeah.
question. Um, you know, biblically speaking, is other than, let's just say, the Bible doesn't talk about usury. Let's assume that the Bible doesn't talk about usury.
Okay.
Is what the bank's doing, or was it completely lawful biblically? Is that the right question? I mean, I know they've made it legal through Congress with technicalities and things of this nature, but
Well,
if you and I were sitting down to make a contract how they operate, would that be lawful?
well, it's not lawful fundamentally because of the you know, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Right there, it's off base because they don't do that to each other.
Right.
The controllers don't do that to one another. They have a different system for everybody else. But the question is, if you choose to engage in one system as opposed to another, like, do you get to offload responsibility because someone made it available to you?
Right.
I know places.
Yeah, it's one of the 7 deadly sins, right? Greed. And so,
Yeah.
When someone offers you that credit card with a, $5,000, with no interest, then, I could get this couch, and then you end up spending that money on something else. And then, well,
Yeah.
maybe I don't want to pay it.
Well, and it's not only the greed that kind of feeds into it. It's all of it. It's greed. It's envy. It's if I have the money, I get the girl. Therefore, it's lust. Like, it's all of these things are feeding into the very same things. And what I would suggest people maybe take a look into, there's not only the 7 deadly sins, but there's the reverse of all of them is like the 7 righteous virtues. So all of them have a counter to them that is, instead of this, you should strive for that. And by looking at that type of thing, it helps to make things more clear on what it is. Like, we're very easy to say, oh, don't do this, but it's a lot harder to say what is the positive that I should do, right?
Yeah.
So overall, my position is just that seeing the wrong is half the battle. Seeing that something is wrong, you then have to decide, do I participate in the wrong? And if I'm not going to participate in the wrong, then what will I do to not participate? And how far am I willing to go? And I don't believe that everyone should do like I did, where you get rid of all the stuff. Like, that's not a necessity, but it is a possibility.
Right.
And that's the thing that that many of us, like, even those of us who are involved in taking on through the legal system the issues that we've perceived as our local government agencies doing wrong, right? We see them doing things and we're like, nope, that's wrong. I'm going to stand up. Well, not everybody can. Not everyone has the capacity. Not everyone is built for that, and not everyone should. But if you can, and if you have the capacity, then you can't point a finger at someone else and say, I don't like how it is, you have to make it better, if you're unwilling to do the things to make it better yourself. Right. And that's the part where, if we're to be the sovereign people, if we're sovereign over ourselves, that's a big part of being sovereign over yourself.
Yeah. So I would say first, you would need the knowledge to know what you're doing is wrong.
Yes.
And then secondly, I don't think anyone here got into this thinking we were going to have a Bible lesson today, but we got one. And I think we did. Yeah. And so I want to thank you for your time and your expertise in the mortgage industry to come on and talk about, why we thought what may or may not have been done is wrong. And I'm not here advocating doing anything like that. We don't want someone going to jail trying to prove a point. If the Canadians, like I said, what the Canadians are doing are technically wrong as well. And
Yeah.
so they participated in the system and, signed that they were going to meet obligations, and they're not going to now. But on the other side, this has been a very corrupt system that has taken advantage of our weaknesses through the devil, the devil and the weaknesses of the seven deadly sins, and taken advantage of, and we have to stop and make accountable at this point. We just have to, because it's ending. It's ending, and we're going to end up in a bigger mess than we're in now if we don't take responsibility.
It is a very clever business model, right? You create the desire for the product before the product's even available.
Right.
You make people want the thing, and then you say, here you go, here's the solution.
That's it. Oh, it's easy. Just take it, and then you can pay later. No problem.
Yeah.
Easy to do. AJ, thank you for your time. I appreciate everything, and you coming on and spending the day with us.
No problem. You're very welcome, Gary.